The galaxy had always been a rough place, but humanity tried to be different. They arrived among the stars with hope in their hearts and peace in their messages. For 15 long years they smiled when others mocked them. They bowed when others demanded it. They apologized when others accused them of crimes they never committed. The elder races of the Galactic Council watched humanity with amusement, like adults watching children play at being important. The humans were young, barely 2 centuries into space travel, and they had no right to demand respect. That was what the Council believed, and they made sure humanity knew it every single day. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of his ship, the Unity's Dawn, and watched the Vrexian warships surround his vessel. His crew of 40 scientists and explorers had been charting a nebula in the neutral zones, far from any claimed territory. They carried no weapons beyond basic defensive shields. Their mission was simple: explore, document, and return home with knowledge. But the Vrexians did not care about missions or neutral space. They only cared that humans were weak and easy to bully. Lieutenant Amy Brooks checked her sensors and looked up at Daniel with worry in her eyes. She had served with him for 6 years, and they had been intercepted by alien warships 9 times in that period. Every time they followed protocol. Every time they filed complaints. Every time nothing happened. The Council would review their case, dismiss it as a misunderstanding, and tell humanity to be more careful about where they traveled. As if the entire galaxy belonged to everyone except humans. The Vrexian commander's face appeared on their screen. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. He informed Daniel that the Unity's Dawn was suspected of espionage and would be boarded immediately. Daniel tried to explain that they were scientists, that they had every right to be in neutral space, that the Vrexian Empire had no jurisdiction here. The commander laughed and cut the transmission. Within minutes, armed Vrexian soldiers materialized on their bridge using transport technology. Humanity had not yet mastered. The Vrexians took everything. They copied every bit of data from the ship's computers. They confiscated personal belongings from the crew. They detained 3 scientists, claiming they needed to be questioned about their activities. Daniel demanded to speak with his government, to contact the Council to follow any legal procedure. The Vrexians ignored him. They took what they wanted and left, beaming back to their ships with 3 human prisoners. The warships vanished into faster-than-light travel, and Daniel was left with a crippled ship and a crew in shock. Back on Earth, Ambassador Stephen Price received the report with a familiar sinking feeling in his stomach. This was the 14th incident in 3 months. The 14th time humanity had been violated, robbed, or assaulted by species who faced no consequences. He sat in his office and prepared another formal complaint, another carefully worded protest that would go nowhere. His aide, Patricia Moore, brought him coffee and watched him work with sad eyes. She had been with him for 8 years, and she had watched him transform from an optimistic diplomat into a tired old man who no longer believed his work mattered. Stephen submitted the complaint through official channels and prepared for another humiliating appearance before the Council. He would stand before representatives of 200 alien species and explain, again, that humans deserved basic rights under galactic law. They would listen with barely concealed contempt. Some would ask why humanity insisted on going places they were not wanted. Others would suggest that if humans were so weak, perhaps they should stay in their own solar system. A few might offer sympathy, but sympathy changed nothing. The Council had rules, but those rules only applied to species strong enough to enforce them. President Richard Cole convened another emergency meeting in the White House Situation Room. He looked around the table at his advisors and saw the same frustration he felt. General Lucas Martin, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presented the military analysis. Humanity had become predictable. Every species in the galaxy knew that humans would complain, protest, and ultimately do nothing. The Vrexian Empire had made attacking human ships into a sport. The Kolathi Syndicate regularly seized human trade vessels and ransomed them back. Smaller species, emboldened by the lack of consequences, had begun testing human colonies on the frontier. Admiral Helen Foster, commander of Earth's defensive fleets, proposed what she called the Reminder Protocol. It was a plan she had been developing for 5 years. A plan that involved showing the galaxy what humanity could do if pushed. But it required approval from civilian leadership, and that approval meant abandoning 15 years of careful diplomacy. It meant admitting that the peaceful approach had failed, President Cole listened to her presentation and felt the weight of the decision. Humanity had worked so hard to be different, to prove that intelligence and civilization did not require violence and intimidation. Could he really throw that away? The meeting ended without a decision. Cole told his advisors he needed time to think. That night he stood in the Oval Office and looked up at the stars through the window. Somewhere up there, 3 human scientists sat in Vrexian prisons and no one was coming to save them. Somewhere up there, the species of the galaxy laughed at humanity's weakness. He went to bed troubled and woke to news that changed everything. The Vrexians had not interrogated the 3 prisoners from Unity's dawn. They had not held them for trial or even for ransom. They had executed them publicly, broadcasting it across open channels as a warning to other inferior species. The recording showed Daniel Hayes and Amy Brooks on their knees, pleading for diplomatic resolution until the very end. The Vrexian executioner made a speech about respecting the natural order of power in the galaxy. Then he killed them while cameras recorded every moment. The video reached Earth within hours. It played on every news channel. It spread across the global network. Humanity watched their people die, begging for the diplomacy that had failed them. President Cole received 10,000 messages in the first hour, all saying the same thing. No more patience. No more diplomacy. No more pretending the galaxy would ever respect them for being peaceful. Cole called another meeting. This time, when Admiral Foster presented the reminder protocol, he did not hesitate. He authorized everything. The military mobilization that humanity had been preparing in secret for years. The weapons systems the Council had banned but never enforced against elder races. The ships built in hidden shipyards beyond the outer planets. All of it activated with a single command. But first, Cole did something the galaxy did not expect. He recalled every human diplomat from every Council station, embassy, and outpost. Ambassador Stephen Price received the order personally. He was to pack his things, deliver a final message, and come home. No explanation, no negotiation, just leave. Patricia Moore helped him prepare, and together they walked into the Council chamber one last time. The alien delegates barely looked up when Stephen began speaking. They expected another protest, another plea for justice. Instead, Stephen said only 7 words that he had been holding inside for years. "You will hear from us soon." Then he turned and walked out. Patricia followed him. The Council delegates looked at each other in confusion. A few laughed. Most dismissed it as human drama. They had no idea what was coming. The galaxy had pushed humanity for 15 years, testing how far they could go, how much abuse the peaceful species would tolerate. They were about to discover that human patience was not infinite. They were about to learn that the most dangerous species in the galaxy were not the warriors who loved to fight, but the peaceful ones who finally decided they had enough. The silence from Earth lasted 3 days. 3 days without human complaints, without diplomatic protests, without any communication at all. The galaxy barely noticed. Then the Vrexian home fleet disappeared, and the universe understood that everything had changed forever. President Cole appeared on every screen across Earth and her colonies. His face was different from the warm leader people had known for years. Something cold had settled into his eyes. Something that came from watching his people die while begging for mercy that never came. He spoke for only 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes changed everything. He told humanity that they had tried the galaxy's way. They had followed rules that no one else followed. They had died following those rules. Then he said the 2 words that would echo through history: no more. The speech was not broadcast to the Galactic Council. Cole did not address the alien species who had spent 15 years treating humanity like children, who needed to learn their place. He spoke only to his own people, and what he told them was simple. Humanity was done asking for permission to exist with dignity. They were done filing complaints that went nowhere. They were done being the galaxy's punching bag. Every human diplomat was coming home. Every human ship was being recalled. The galaxy wanted to see what humanity looked like without patience. They were about to find out. Within 48 hours, every human presence withdrew from alien space. Embassies emptied overnight. Trade missions packed up and left. Scientific exchanges ended abruptly. The Galactic Council chambers, which had hosted human diplomats for 15 years, stood empty. The alien delegates barely noticed at first. Some joked that humanity was throwing a tantrum. Others suggested the humans would return within a week, apologizing and begging to be readmitted. They did not understand that humanity was not leaving in anger. They were leaving to prepare. General Lucas Martin activated protocols that had been in place for a decade. Across human space, military reservists received orders to report immediately. Shipyards that the galaxy thought built exploration vessels revealed their true purpose. Space stations that registered as research facilities transformed into command centers. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since the third year of diplomatic failures. Every insult, every attack, every dismissal had been documented and analyzed. The military had watched and learned from every conflict in galactic history. They knew how every major species fought. They knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their tactics, and their blind spots. Commander Jake Sullivan walked onto the bridge of a ship the galaxy had never seen. The Retribution was a dreadnought, bigger than anything humanity had openly admitted to building. Its hull was covered in composite armor that human engineers had spent years perfecting. Its weapons were hidden behind panels that showed nothing on conventional scanners. Most importantly, its crew had trained for 5 years in absolute secrecy. 2,000 men and women who knew they might never be called to action, but who prepared anyway. Now their moment had arrived. Jake looked at his crew and saw no hesitation in their eyes. His chief engineer, Chris Hoffman, reported that all systems were operating at peak efficiency. The reactor Chris had designed produced twice the power of any comparable alien vessel. Tactical officer Lisa Chen ran final checks on her combat algorithms. Lisa was gentle in person, soft-spoken and kind, but her mind worked like a machine when analyzing battle scenarios. She had studied every space combat engagement in recorded history, and found patterns that others missed. Her systems could predict enemy movements with terrifying accuracy. Dr. Elizabeth Grant worked 3 levels below the bridge in a laboratory most of the crew never saw. She had spent 12 years developing weapons that broke every rule the Galactic Council had established. The Council banned certain technologies not because they were cruel, but because they were too effective. The elder races had agreed long ago that some weapons made war too easy, too quick, too devastating. They banned these weapons for themselves, but they also made sure younger species could not develop them. Elizabeth had developed them anyway. Quantum disruption torpedoes that ignored shields, electromagnetic pulse systems that could disable entire fleets, biological agents that targeted specific genetic markers. She had built horrors, but she had built them for defense. Now the definition of defense was about to expand. Admiral Helen Foster commanded the human fleet from a station in orbit around Mars. She had been planning this operation for years, refining it every time humanity suffered another attack. Her staff officers had mapped every military installation in Vrexian space. They knew where the Kalathi Syndicate kept their shipyards. They had identified supply lines, communication hubs, and command centers for every species that had wronged humanity. The intelligence network humanity had built was invisible and complete. Lieutenant Paul Jensen had led that effort, deploying stealth satellites that the galaxy never detected. Every major military power thought their secrets were safe. They were not. Helen looked at her tactical display and saw the pieces falling into place. 50 warships ready for deployment, 200 support vessels, loaded and waiting, 3,000 fighters, pilots strapped in and eager. But the most important weapon was not visible on any display. It was the 15 years of rage that humanity had bottled up. It was the faces of Daniel Hayes and Amy Brooks executed on their knees. It was every insult, every theft, every casual cruelty the galaxy had inflicted. That rage had been refined into something cold and methodical. Humanity was not going to war in a fury. They were going to war with a plan. The Vrexian Empire continued business as usual, unaware that anything had changed. Their military leadership met in comfortable offices and discussed their next moves. They had profited greatly from attacking human vessels. The scientific data they stole was valuable, and selling human prisoners was even more lucrative. Some younger officers suggested they might be pushing too far, that humanity might eventually respond. The elder commanders laughed at this concern. Humans were weak. Everyone knew it. Their diplomats were soft. Their military was tiny. They had never retaliated against anyone. Why would they start now? The Kalathi Syndicate was bolder. With humanity silent, they saw opportunity. They began planning to seize human colony ships that were traveling to new worlds. Those ships carried thousands of civilians, families seeking new lives among the stars. The Kalathi specialized in selling labor contracts, a polite term for slavery. Human workers would fetch high prices. especially now that humanity seemed too weak to protect them. Syndicate commanders issued orders to intercept 3 colony ships over the next month. They expected easy profits. They had no idea they were signing their own death warrants. President Cole received hourly updates on fleet readiness. Patricia Moore, now his chief of staff, coordinated between civilian government and military command. She had watched Stephen Price age decades in just a few years from the stress of diplomatic failure. Now she watched Cole carry the weight of what was coming. He was about to order actions that would kill thousands, maybe millions. He was about to prove that humanity could be just as ruthless as any species in the galaxy. The decision haunted him, but he did not waver. Sometimes being a good leader meant making terrible choices. Admiral Foster requested permission to begin operations. Cole gave it without hesitation. The order went out across all human channels with a simple code phrase that every ship commander had memorized. Remind them. 2 words that meant the end of human patience and the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen. Humanity at war, not in rage, not in chaos, but with the cold precision of a species that had spent 15 years learning exactly how to hurt their enemies. The first targets were selected with care. Humanity would not strike civilian populations. They would not bomb cities or destroy homes. That was not who they were even now. But every military installation, every warship, every weapons platform that belonged to species who had attacked humans was marked for destruction. The galaxy had taught humanity that mercy was weakness. Now humanity would teach them what happened when you mistake patience for an inability to fight back. Jake Sullivan received his orders and plotted a course for the Vrexian home fleet. Lisa Chen activated her tactical systems. Chris Hoffman pushed the reactor to full power. The Retribution jumped to faster than light speed, and behind it 49 more warships followed. They moved in silence, invisible to the sensors the galaxy relied on. Human stealth technology had advanced beyond anything the elder races imagined possible. The fleet could travel anywhere, strike anything, and vanish before anyone understood what happened. The Vrexian home fleet consisted of 300 warships, the pride of their empire. They patrolled the space around their homeworld with arrogance earned from 1,000 victories. No species had challenged them in 2 centuries. They were the dominant military power in their sector. They believed themselves untouchable. In 6 hours, they would all be dead, and the galaxy would finally understand that humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to show their strength. The Vrexian home fleet disappeared in 6 hours. Not destroyed in battle, not defeated in combat, simply gone. 300 warships that had terrorized a dozen species suddenly went dark. Their communication systems failed. Their life support systems shut down. Their crews died at their stations, gasping for air that stopped flowing. The ships drifted in space like metal coffins, and no one knew what happened. Vrexian High Command sent distress signals to the Galactic Council, screaming for help, demanding intervention. Their messages were interrupted by a simple transmission in perfect Vrexian language. You had 15 years to stop. The message was signed by Commander Jake Sullivan, and it was the first time the galaxy heard that name. It would not be the last. The Retribution appeared over Karos Prime, the largest Vrexian military shipyard in their empire. The station was massive, home to 80 warships under construction and 200 defense platforms. It had never been attacked in its 300-year history. Station Commander Vexlar had fought in 40 campaigns and conquered systems for the glory of the Vrexian Empire. When his sensors detected a single human ship approaching, he laughed. One vessel against his fortress. The humans had finally lost their minds. Jake Sullivan sat in the captain's chair and watched the shipyard grow larger on the view screen. His crew was silent, focused, ready. Lisa Chen tracked every defensive platform, every ship, every weapon emplacement. Her algorithms predicted exactly how the Vrexians would respond. Chris Hoffman kept the reactor running at maximum power, feeding energy to systems the Vrexians could not detect. Jake did not bother hailing the station. There would be no warnings, no demands for surrender, no dramatic speeches. Humanity was done talking. Vexlar ordered his defenses to open fire. 200 plasma cannons launched their deadly payloads at the Retribution. Enough firepower to destroy a planet rained down on the human ship. Lisa's fingers danced across her console, and the Retribution's shields adapted to every frequency, absorbed every hit, and reflected nothing back on sensors. The Vrexians saw their weapons strike home, but the human ship remained undamaged. Vexler's confidence turned to confusion, then to fear. Jake gave a single order. Lisa launched Dr. Grant's quantum disruption torpedoes. They were invisible to conventional sensors, impossible to intercept, and they ignored every form of shielding the galaxy used. The torpedoes phased through the hulls of Rexian ships and detonated inside their reactor cores. One by one, the warships exploded from within. The defense platforms tried to target the torpedoes but found nothing to shoot at. They died next, their own reactors turning into bombs that tore them apart. In 20 minutes, the pride of Rexian military industry became a debris field. The Retribution had not taken a single hit that mattered. Jake ordered the jump to faster than light speed, and the Retribution vanished before rescue ships could arrive. Vexler survived only because his command center was designed to detach and escape in emergencies. He floated in space in an escape pod and watched his life's work burn. He sent a message to Rexian High Command that would be ignored for days. The humans are not what we thought. They are not weak. They are not afraid. Stop attacking them before they kill us all. Across Rexian space, similar attacks unfolded with mechanical precision. Captain Michelle Torres commanded a strike wing of 30 fighters that eliminated every forward operating base in the Sigma Quadrant. Her pilots flew ships that moved faster and turned sharper than anything the Vrexians had encountered. Lieutenant Kevin Gray, her best pilot, destroyed 6 defense stations in under an hour. The human fighters appeared, struck, and vanished before the Vrexians could mount a defense. Every base, every outpost, every military installation that humanity had identified was wiped from existence. The attacks followed rules that the galaxy had never seen in war. No civilian targets were touched. No cities were bombed. No merchant vessels were destroyed. Humanity struck only military assets, only the forces that had attacked them. But they struck with such overwhelming force and precision that the Vrexian military ceased to exist as a functioning entity within 72 hours. The empire that had terrorized human ships for years found itself helpless, unable to defend anything, unable to retaliate against an enemy they could not find. The Kalathi Syndicate watched the destruction of the Vrexian military and made a choice they thought was smart. They would return the human colonists they had captured. They would withdraw from human space. They would pretend none of their attacks had ever happened. Surely the humans would accept this and leave them alone. They sent messages to Earth offering peace terms. No response came. The Syndicate began to worry. Commander Brandon Walsh piloted the Shadow's Edge, a stealth destroyer that no sensor in the galaxy could detect. His mission was simple: find the Kalathi slave convoy carrying captured human colonists and rescue them. His ship slipped through Kalathi space like a ghost, invisible and silent. He found the convoy 3 days after leaving Earth. 15 Kalathi vessels, all armed, all carrying stolen humans who were being transported to labor camps across the sector. Brandon positioned his ship and waited for the perfect moment. The Kalathi convoy commander received a transmission from an unknown source. It was in his own language, spoken perfectly. "Release the humans and you live." The commander tried to trace the signal and found nothing. He assumed it was a bluff, some human trick to scare him. He ordered his ships to maintain course and increase speed. That was his final mistake as a free being. The Shadow's Edge dropped its stealth field and appeared directly in the middle of the convoy. Before the Kalathi could react, Brandon launched electromagnetic pulse weapons that shut down every ship simultaneously. No explosions, no deaths, just complete system failure across the entire convoy. The Kalathi crews found themselves floating in dead ships, life support running on emergency batteries, weapons offline, engines cold. Brandon's Marines boarded each vessel and evacuated every human prisoner. The colonists were terrified, traumatized, but alive. The Kalathi commander regained communications and tried to negotiate. He offered to return the humans in exchange for his ships and his freedom. Brandon's response became legendary across human space. "You bought them. The price is everything you have." The Shadow's Edge towed the rescued colonists to safety and left the Kalathi crews drifting in space. They had enough life support to survive for several days, enough time for someone to find them. Maybe. Brandon did not particularly care. News of the attacks spread across the galaxy within hours. The species who had laughed at human weakness suddenly found themselves very quiet. The Vrexian Empire, one of the most powerful military forces in known space, had been crippled in 3 days. The Kalathi Syndicate, Masters of raiding and theft had lost an entire convoy without firing a shot. Other species began to wonder if they had made mistakes in how they treated humanity. The ones who had been cruel began to worry. The ones who had been dismissive began to reconsider. On Earth, President Cole received constant updates on the operation. 0 human casualties, 100% mission success rate, every target destroyed or disabled, every captured colonist recovered. The military had been waiting for this, preparing for this, and now they executed their plans with the pent-up fury of 15 years of humiliation transformed into cold calculation. Patricia Moore noted that the efficiency was terrifying. Humanity was not raging across the galaxy in blind anger. They were dismantling their enemies with surgical precision. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session and demanded that humanity cease its unprovoked aggression immediately. The demand was broadcast across all channels. For 2 days, humanity did not respond. The council members began to argue among themselves. Some said they should send peacekeeping forces to stop the humans. Others pointed out that peacekeeping forces would likely end up as debris fields. A few quiet voices suggested that perhaps humanity had been provoked, that perhaps the council bore some responsibility for ignoring 15 years of complaints. Then Admiral Helen Foster responded, and the galaxy fell silent. Her message was broadcast to every inhabited world, every station, every ship. She appeared in her uniform. Medals from years of service displayed on her chest, and behind her stood rows of captured Vrexian and Kalathi officers. They were unharmed, well-fed, and stripped of their rank insignia. Helen's voice was calm, almost pleasant, as she addressed the council and the watching universe. You allowed our explorers to be murdered. You allowed our colonists to be enslaved. You allowed violations, theft, and insult for 15 years. Every species in the council is complicit. The Vrexians and Kalathi made the mistake of thinking our patience was weakness. She paused and let her words sink into the minds of every being watching. Do not compound their error. Her image vanished, and the galaxy understood that humanity was not asking for permission anymore. They were not seeking mediation. They were delivering justice that the council had refused to provide, and they would continue until they decided to stop. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. 200 species sat in their designated seats and watched Admiral Helen Foster's hologram with something they had not felt in centuries. Fear. Not the fear of death in battle, but the fear of being completely outmatched by a species they had considered beneath them. Helen stood with perfect military posture, and behind her, captured enemy officers stood in neat rows like students waiting for punishment. The visual was deliberate and devastating. Humanity had not just won battles. They had captured their enemies without breaking a sweat. Counselor Thexron of the Krillian hierarchy was the first to speak after Helen's message ended. His species had ruled their sector for 2,000 years. They had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. He had sat on the council for 300 years and believed he had seen everything. Now he looked at the human admiral and felt uncertainty for the first time in living memory. He demanded that humanity accept council mediation immediately. He used the voice of authority that had made younger species bow for generations. Helen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Mediation. Helen repeated the word like it tasted bad. We tried that. We tried it 14 times in 3 months. We tried it for 15 years. Your mediators told us to be patient. They told us to understand that newer species must earn respect. Her smile vanished and her eyes went cold. We have earned it now. The simple statement hit the council like a physical blow. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked away. They all knew she was right. Lieutenant Colonel George Miller appeared beside Helen with a datapad in his hands. He was younger than her, barely 40, but he had spent 10 years compiling evidence of every violation of council law committed against humanity. He began presenting it to the council with the precision of a lawyer prosecuting a murder case. Every attack on human ships, logged and documented. Every theft of human property, recorded with exact dates and locations. Every insult delivered by council members to human diplomats preserved in audio and video. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. George showed the council recordings of their own members dismissing human complaints. He played back moments where council mediators told human diplomats to stop being so sensitive. He displayed messages from Vrexian commanders bragging about attacking human vessels. messages that had been sent to council officials who never acted on them. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of council authority. By the time George finished his presentation, several delegates were staring at their desks, unable to meet his eyes. Diplomat Nancy Hughes stepped forward next. She had replaced Ambassador Stephen Price after he returned to Earth, and she was not the gentle diplomat the council expected. Nancy was a lawyer first and a diplomat second. She had reviewed every treaty, every agreement, every law that governed the Galactic Council. She presented her findings in language so clear that even the most obtuse council member could not misunderstand. Humanity was exercising legitimate self-defense under council law. Every action they had taken was legal according to the very rules the council claimed to uphold. Nancy explained that council law allowed species to defend themselves when the council failed to protect them. It allowed for proportional response to aggression. It permitted military action against forces that committed acts of piracy, murder, and slavery. Humanity had not violated a single law. The Vrexians had, the Colothi had, and the council had violated its own charter by refusing to enforce its laws on behalf of humanity. Nancy delivered this information without emotion, just cold facts that the council could not dispute. When she finished, she asked if any council member wished to challenge her legal analysis. No one spoke. The presentation was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species watched as humanity systematically dismantled the council's moral authority. This was what terrified them more than the military victories. Humanity was not acting like the berserker species that occasionally rose up in galactic history. They were not destroying everything in rage-fueled madness. They were prosecuting a war with lawyers, documentation, and legal justification for every action. They were proving that they were right, that the council was wrong, and that everything humanity did was the council's fault. Commander Diane Foster, Admiral Helen Foster's daughter, appeared on screens across inhabited space with additional footage. Diane commanded the cruiser Steadfast, and her ship had been recording human military operations from the beginning. She showed the galaxy something that made the legal arguments even more powerful. Human ships had protected civilian populations during every attack. Before striking Vrexian military targets, human forces had evacuated nearby civilians. Dr. Richard Turner, a xenobiologist in Diane's crew, led medical teams that treated wounded Vrexians and moved them to safety before human weapons fired. The footage showed human Marines going building to building near a Vrexian military base, ensuring every civilian was clear before the base was destroyed. It showed human medical ships arriving at Colothi stations to treat injuries caused by the fighting. It showed humanity waging war with more care for enemy civilians than those enemies had ever shown for human lives. The message was clear and more humiliating than any military defeat. Humanity would show them how civilized species conducted warfare. The Vrexian Empire sued for peace within hours of the broadcasts. Their remaining military leaders sent desperate messages to Earth begging for terms. The Colothi Syndicate followed, their council of merchants offering reparations, apologies, anything humanity wanted if they would just stop. Other species who had wronged humanity began sending similar messages. They all assumed humanity would negotiate now, that the violence would end, that things would return to some version of normal. Admiral Foster's response was broadcast to every world in known space. You do not get to choose when this ends. Helen's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. You had that choice 15 years ago. You had it 14 times ago. You had it 100 insults ago, 1,000 violations ago. Every time you chose to test our patience. She leaned forward and her eyes were hard as steel. Now you get to learn what happens when you break it. The transmission ended and the galaxy understood that humanity was not finished. Not even close. Captain Justin Clark received his orders with grim satisfaction. His assault carrier Valiant was the largest ship in the human fleet, carrying 5,000 Marines and enough firepower to conquer a planet. His orders were not to conquer, but to occupy. The Vrexian homeworld was his destination. Not to destroy it, but to rebuild it better than the Vrexians had ever managed. Justin thought the orders were insane until he read the full briefing. Then he understood what humanity was really doing. The occupation would be temporary but thorough. Human engineers would rebuild infrastructure. Human doctors would establish hospitals. Human teachers would open schools. Humanity would demonstrate that they were not just better at war but better at peace, better at civilization, better at everything the elder races claimed to represent. The humiliation would be complete and permanent. Future generations of Rexians would learn that humans had saved them from their own corrupt leadership. On Earth, President Cole addressed his people for the second time since the war began. He looked tired but determined. He told humanity that the fighting would continue until the galaxy understood that attacking humans carried consequences too severe to contemplate. He told them that occupation forces were being prepared, that human presence would remain in Vrexian and Kalathi space until new governments were established. He told them this was not conquest but correction. Patricia Moore watched Cole deliver his speech and saw the burden he carried. He was ordering actions that previous human leaders would have considered unthinkable. He was reshaping galactic politics through force. But he was also protecting humanity in a way that diplomacy never had. She brought him reports throughout the day, reports of alien species withdrawing from border regions near human space, reports of trade routes being reopened by aliens who suddenly wanted to do business on human terms, reports of smaller species asking humanity for protection against the same elder races who had oppressed them. The galaxy was reorganizing itself around a new reality. Humanity was no longer a junior species to be ignored. They were a force that commanded respect through demonstrated capability. Species that had laughed at human diplomats now carefully worded their communications to avoid giving offense. Pirates who had raided human ships vanished into deep space. Empires that had expanded toward human territory suddenly discovered they needed to consolidate their holdings elsewhere. Admiral Foster received hourly reports from her ships. The Vrexian military had ceased to exist as an organized force. The Kalathi Syndicate had recalled every vessel to their home systems for defense. Both civilizations were paralyzed, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Helen looked at her tactical displays and felt no triumph, only grim satisfaction. This was not glory. This was necessity. The galaxy had forced humanity to become something they never wanted to be. A species so dangerous that everyone else had to think twice before acting against them. The question now was what came next. Humanity had won the war in less. The occupation of Rexia Prime lasted 3 weeks, but it was 3 weeks that changed galactic history forever. Human Marines landed on the Vrexian homeworld expecting resistance and found none. The Vrexian military had been so thoroughly destroyed that no organized defense existed. The civilian population watched human ships descend from orbit with fear, expecting the same brutality their own empire had inflicted on conquered worlds. Instead, they got something they had never experienced under their own government: competent administration and genuine care for their well-being. General Lucas Martin commanded the occupation forces personally. He established his headquarters in the former military command center and immediately began coordinating reconstruction efforts. The first thing he did was restore power to civilian areas that had lost electricity during the fighting. The second thing was opening emergency hospitals staffed by human doctors. The third was distributing food to populations that the Vrexian government had been neglecting for decades. Within 48 hours, ordinary Vrexians realized that the human occupiers were treating them better than their own leaders ever had. Engineer Chris Hoffman took charge of rebuilding infrastructure across the planet. He had designed weapon systems that destroyed the Vrexian military, and now he used the same brilliant mind to rebuild their civilization. His teams worked 20-hour days repairing water treatment plants, fixing transportation networks, and upgrading communication systems. The equipment they installed was better than what the Vrexians had before. Human technology flowed into Vrexian cities, not as tribute or payment, but as investment in a stable future. The message humanity sent was clear and more devastating than any weapon. They were not just better at war, they were better at everything. Better at building, better at healing, better at governing. The Vrexian people watched humans do in 3 weeks what their own government had failed to do in 3 centuries: provide basic services efficiently and fairly. The humiliation was complete when Vrexian children started asking why humans could not stay permanently. Captain Justin Clark coordinated with local Vrexian leaders, who had not been part of the corrupt military leadership. He helped them establish interim councils to manage local affairs. He provided them with resources and training. He treated them with respect while making it clear that any return to the old ways would not be tolerated. Justin found that most Vrexians were relieved. Their empire had been militaristic and cruel, But that cruelty had been directed inward as much as outward. The common people had suffered under their own government's boot. The Galactic Council watched all of this happen and understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity was not conquering for resources or territory. They were conquering to make a point. The point was that if you attacked humans, they would not just defeat you. They would rebuild you into something better and make you grateful for it. Several council members quietly suggested that maybe humanity should take a larger role in galactic affairs. Others realized they had created a monster by pushing peaceful people too far. Ambassador Nancy Hughes returned to the council chambers after a month of silence. The same delegates who had dismissed human complaints for 15 years now stood when she entered. She did not acknowledge the gesture. She walked to the podium and presented humanity's demands, not requests, not proposals. Demands backed by the most powerful military force the galaxy had seen in living memory. The Council would reform its enforcement mechanisms. Laws would apply equally to all species. Violations would be investigated and punished regardless of the violator's political power. Nancy presented what became known as the Hughes Doctrine. Any species that committed acts of piracy, slavery, or unprovoked military aggression against another species would face human intervention. Humanity would become the enforcement arm the Council should have been all along. Several council members objected, claiming this gave humanity too much power. Nancy's response was simple and devastating. You had power and refused to use it justly. We have power and will use it to protect those you failed. The Council voted to accept the doctrine. They had no real choice. Admiral Helen Foster transitioned the human military from war footing to peacekeeping operations. Captain Lisa Chen, promoted to admiral, took command of the new enforcement fleet. Her ships patrolled trade routes that had been plagued by piracy for centuries. The pirates vanished within weeks. Lisa's reputation for tactical brilliance meant that no one wanted to test whether they could escape her forces. They could not, and the few who tried became object lessons in why attacking humans or anyone humans protected was a fatal mistake. Commander Jake Sullivan received new orders that surprised him. The Retribution, the ship that had destroyed the Vrexian home fleet, would become a humanitarian vessel. Jake's crew spent the next year delivering aid to species the Council had long ignored. Refugees who had fled wars received food and shelter from the ship that had proven human military might. Jake found the work more satisfying than combat. His crew agreed. They had joined the military to protect humanity, and now they were protecting everyone who needed it. Dr. Elizabeth Grant's weapons division shifted focus to defensive technologies. The quantum disruption torpedoes that had won the war were locked away, never to be used again unless absolutely necessary. Elizabeth began sharing defensive shield technology with species that agreed to the new galactic order. She gave away secrets that human scientists had spent decades developing. The goal was not to maintain human military superiority forever, but to create a galaxy where military superiority mattered less than mutual cooperation. The Vrexian Empire held elections 6 months after the occupation began. The Vrexians chose leaders who promised peaceful cooperation with other species. The new government formally apologized for decades of aggression and agreed to pay reparations to species they had wronged. Most shocking was when they thanked humanity for the occupation. The Vrexian representative at the Council stated publicly that his people had been freed from tyranny by the species they had tried to destroy. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Colothi Syndicate underwent similar transformation. Human forces had occupied their major worlds and dismantled the crime syndicates that had run their civilization. Brandon Walsh, promoted to captain, worked with reformed Colothi leaders to build legitimate government institutions. The Colothi had been merchants and traders before corruption turned them into slavers. Humanity helped them return to honest commerce. Within 2 years, Colothi ships were carrying human goods across the galaxy under strict fair trade agreements. Former Commander Vexilar, the Vrexian officer who had laughed at the Retribution before watching his station destroyed, became an unlikely voice for peace. He toured the galaxy speaking about his experiences. He told audiences that humanity had shown him what true civilization looked like. He described watching human soldiers risk their lives to save Vrexian civilians during the fighting. He admitted that his species had been wrong about humans, wrong about strength, wrong about everything. His speeches were popular across dozens of worlds. President Richard Cole finished his term exhausted but satisfied. The galaxy had changed more in 2 years than in the previous 2 centuries. Human colonies expanded without fear of attack. Human ships traveled anywhere without harassment. More importantly, dozens of smaller species that had suffered under elder race domination now looked to humanity for protection and guidance. Cole's final act as president was establishing the Terran Peace Initiative, a program that combined diplomatic outreach with the implicit promise of military intervention if needed. Patricia Moore became the first director of the Peace Initiative. She remembered every insult Stephen Price had endured, every complaint that went nowhere, every time humanity had been treated like children who needed to learn their place. Now she traveled the galaxy representing a species that everyone respected, not because they loved humanity, but because they understood what happened when you pushed humans too far. It was not the relationship humanity had wanted, but it was effective. Trade flourished. Conflicts decreased. The galaxy became more peaceful not through love, but through the memory of what human patience looked like when it finally broke. Admiral Helen Foster retired to write her memoirs. She called the book The Price of Patience, and it became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. In it, she explained how humanity had prepared for war while pursuing peace. She described the pain of watching her people die while politicians debated proper responses. She detailed the plans that had been ready for years, waiting for the moment when humanity would finally say enough. Her final chapter was a warning to future generations. Peace is precious, but peace without strength is just waiting to be victimized. The monument station in orbit around Earth displayed names of every human who died before humanity learned to enforce respect. Daniel Hayes and Amy Brooks were at the top of the list. Thousands more followed, victims of the years when humanity believed patience alone would earn them a place among the stars. Ambassador Stephen Price, who died 2 years after returning from the Council, was memorialized there too. He had fought with words until words proved insufficient. His epitaph read, "He tried until